First of all, I would like to congratulate Nitin on this wonderful book. I was here the last 5 minutes when Basalingava was talking about the democracy and the theater and so on. To me, it seems like this is an extension of that conversation. The book is so wonderful, and it is really about the constitutional values, the responsibility of the citizens in a democracy, and so on and so forth. And I always think that it is difficult to capture current political and even social situations in non-fiction. And fiction probably is the only way, I mean, since I'm also a fiction writer, is to capture the complexity of the current political and social situations. And Nitin has done it in a wonderful, marvelous way. And Nitin, congratulations again. Let us start with the customary question of the inspiration, or what is behind this, and how he found this manuscript.
Okay. The inspiration and the findings are two different. Thank you for all for attending. I believe that there is a fashion show also going on somewhere. So if you've come for the fashion show, it's not here. It's somewhere else. So the inspiration for this is, we've been teaching public policy for several years in Bangalore now. And when we are looking at ancient texts of policy, you don't find any. So people read the Arthashastra, which is, of course, a book for kings. You know, it is designed, the Arthashastra was written for princes to, educate themselves. And then I looked at Panchatantra. And everybody, all of us think that the Panchatantra is a book of stories for children. There are moral stories there and so on. But when you actually read the Panchatantra is also for princes. The values and the ethics in the Panchatantra are for kings, for princes. They are not for the education of ordinary citizens, right? Because kings can do a lot of things. You know, kings can kill, kings can go to war. The international relations is amoral. So morality for kings is Rajadharma is very different from Prajadharma. So I said, what is Prajadharma? So there weren't any books. And those of us who read civics in 6th standard, I talk about this, 6th or 7th standard we go to civics, and all we are taught is that what's the minimum age to become the president of India? And you know the answer is 35. And that's absolutely useless to you as a citizen, right? So you have no idea what it means to be a citizen. So the origin of the book is, can we find a book that is about Prajadharma? Can we find a book that can tell people of all ages, especially children and younger people, about what it means to be a citizen? And in this day and age where there is massive polarization, people accept that the government can do anything, the government can do no wrong. It's important for us to know what the duty of a citizen is, the dharma of citizenship. So that's the origin and the serious intent behind the book. Well, the book is, as you said, is a book of fiction, and there's a very nice story of how I found the manuscript, and I got hold of it and got translated it using artificial intelligence and so on. But the origin story is, this is the motivation.
I think it may not be inappropriate to talk about how you found the manuscript. But before that, I think, let me just respond to what he said. It's very true that the Prajadharma is something that is so essential that one needs to be aware in today's times. I don't know how many of you are aware, in last 3-4 days, there was there was an event in support of Palestine in Rangashankara. And it was a closed door meeting, but still the police stopped it. And there was a furor in Karnataka. All the writers and thinkers protested it. And then yesterday, a long explanation is given by the chief minister. Good sense prevailed. And he says that this is done by some mistake by a lower level police officer, and then this is not something that our government stands for, and so on and so forth. It happened because the people came out and said, they expressed their minds. And that, I think, is very important, because one is to say that, look, police did not give us permission and keep quiet. Second is, what are your rights? And then how you express it and where you go with it. So coming back to the book, which is something really to do with what I just now said, Nitin, can you talk about how you found this manuscript? It's an interesting story.
Well, the story goes like this. Uh, I used to work for the Singapore government, and I quit my job to start Takshashila. And I used to hang around the National University of Singapore's library. And one particular time, I was in the porch, and I see this Afghan man, pakul cap, long beard, shalwar, and he was looking kind of lost. And then he looked at me and he says, Hindi, do you speak Hindi? I said, yeah. And he was very, very, very happy to see this. Then he says, I want to go to the central library. Can you show me the way? So I said, central library is 5 kilometers away. I'm going in a taxi, I can drop you there. So on the way, he says, he says he's going there. Some ancient manuscript is there in the library. He wants to refer to those records, etc. And we don't talk about anything else. And when I get off the taxi, he says, what's your name? I said, my name is Nitin. And he says, Nitin of Takshashila. And he gives me that very Afghan hug. And the story sort of ends there. We moved to India, and before we just moved, I receive a parcel in the post which comes from Afghanistan. I don't really open it. And I open it during the lockdown. And I find that there are some manuscripts there. There are some pages. And it's in a language which nobody seems to understand. So it's scanned. Some AI kind of thing is done on it. It's not fully available, so partly translated. And then I translate the rest of it. I interpolate and all of that. And finally, what you have is, I take responsibility for all the stuff that is in the book. But that's the origin story.
There is a second part to the story, which we'll tell you just before we close the session. So if you want to know it, you'll have to stay on till then. Yeah. Nitin, would you like to read something from the book?
I'll start by talking about Praja Dharma. Because, everybody is familiar with the word Yatha Raja Tata Praja. Right? That's, I think, a statement which used to make sense in the days of kings. But in days of democracy, it's actually the opposite. Yatha Praja Tatha Raja. Right? Because the king, the civil servants, some distinguished civil servants are in here today. All of these people are cut off the same cloth from us. So if our values, our morals, our ways of looking at the world are twisted, that's the same which you will get from the people who govern us. Right? So it's very important for us to understand Praja Dharma. What does it mean to be a citizen? And for us, the good news in India, at least, is we have a wonderful constitution. And the preamble of the constitution tells you literally what the Praja Dharma is. Right? It's not just about rights. It's also about a relationship that we have with the Republic of India. So it's the relationship which, as a citizen, we have certain rights which are protected by the state. And we hold the state and the people who govern us accountable to us to ensure that our rights and liberties are protected. That's the fundamental Praja relationship, Raja-Praja relationship. So the first book in this, there are 4 sections, 4 books. And it reads like what those of you who have seen video cassettes in the 80s will know. This, if you see a trailer of a Hindi movie, it says action-packed musical romantic thriller of the year with a detective story and a spy. So all of those masalas are there. There's action, it's a detective story, there are spy stories, there is a puzzle, there are puzzles within puzzles, and all of that. So there are 4 sections in the book. The first section is about a crow called Rajni Datta who wants to marry a very beautiful crow called Chandramani. Now, he goes to Chandramani and he proposes and says, look, I want to marry you. And Chandramani says, look, dime a dozen guys, I have to be sure that you're worthy of my hand. So can you bring me one of the Navaratnas? So he says, look, I have no Navaratna. He says, no, you can take 100 days. So 100 days later, we'll come and meet on this mango tree or jackfruit tree. And you must give me the jewel in 100 days. So he flies up, he goes up north, he goes south, he goes east, he goes west. He travels the length and breadth. He has many, many adventures. So each of his adventures is one little story, very short story in the book. And at the end, he comes back to Chandramani and he says something. But before we get to the Chandramani and that story, I'll just read one of the adventures that he has. So one of the adventures is called the mongoose who was wise and just. So I'm going to read, bear with me. Uh, we have time. The mongoose who was wise and just. In the middle of the great southern river, there is an island by the name of Oravela. It was ruled by the notorious lion Durguna, whose depredations got worse by the day. The terror he created in the minds of his subjects was the basis of his rule. This he reinforced at regular intervals through arbitrary acts of cruelty and caprice. 4 jackals were his ministers, sidekicks, and principal enforcers, carrying out all kinds of atrocities in his name. First, Durguna demanded that he be carried around on the back of the tallest elephant, Balagaja. Then he forced the monkeys to wash and clean him every day. All animals were to prostrate themselves whenever he passed by. Those who failed to do so would be thrown into the river and have their property confiscated. All this they endured until one day Durguna ordered that each animal must send him one of his offspring as a special tax. Mother Hare decided that enough was enough, and she would not put up with Durguna's misrule anymore. Others were inspired by her courage, and thus began the revolt. The animals marched to Durguna's seat and demanded that he revoke all his oppressive demands. This he refused and threatened to order his enforcers to attack them. But when he looked around, he discovered that the 4 jackals were suddenly nowhere to be seen. He bared his fangs. He gave a mighty roar. He clawed the air in great fury. But the assembled animals did not move back an inch. That was when Balagaja's mother moved forward and calmly sat in front of Durguna, thus shielding his subjects. The tyrant realized that the game was up and promised to mend his ways. His subjects, however, had enough of him and threw him into the river. After their bad experience with kings, the animals decided that they would elect their leaders instead. That was how Vanaketu the mongoose came to become the chief of Oravela. He promised a benevolent rule, assuring freedom, equality, and justice for all. For a few months, everybody reveled in the heady atmosphere of the mongoose's administration. Then, one day, the 4 jackals quietly approached Vanaketu. Bending low in submission, they said that they would be honored to serve their new master, just as they had served the old. After all, administering a realm was no easy task, and their counsel, skills, and administrative experience would be an invaluable asset to the chief. Besides, they could also help him in his re-election. Vanaketu thought, these jackals are untrustworthy, but I think they'll be useful to me. So he agreed to employ them. No one raised their voice because they respected Vanaketu and knew that he was just and wise. Then the jackals suggested that Vanaketu should be able to perform his duties better if he could move faster from place to place. For this to happen, the other animals would be required to clear the road whenever he approached. Vanaketu agreed. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and knew that he was just and wise. Next, the jackals exhorted Anugaja, the little elephant, to volunteer to carry Vanaketu on his back. For what a privilege it was for a young elephant to be the leader's mount. What a privilege it was for the little monkeys to wipe their leader's body clean every day. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and knew that he was just and wise. A thought then occurred to Vanaketu that since he was their chosen leader, perhaps the animals could bow to show their respect, not to him, but to his high office. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and knew that he was just and wise. Then, one day, after a review of the realm's finances, the jackals proposed a special tax on everyone. Each animal was to put at their leader's disposal just one of its offspring every year. Vanaketu agreed. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and knew that he was just and wise. Yeah. So what happens then is, after a story like this, Rajnidatta tells this story to the crow Chandramani. And Chandramani is, she's not just beautiful, she's extremely smart, sharp, intellectual woman, So she asks and challenges Rajnidatta. So she asks Rajnidatta, what's the moral of the story? Why are you telling me this story? So Rajnidatta says, that is why Bhimaraya, the great lawmaker, warned that hero worship is a sure road to degradation and eventual dictatorship. Leaders should never be beyond criticism. leaders should never be immune to shame. A happy and prosperous realm is one where citizenry is ever vigilant, ever critical, and ever vocal. So then, she challenges him and they have a conversation on this. So the stories go on like this. So finally, I'll just end with what happens in the Chandramani story. So she comes, Rajni Datta comes and says, look, I couldn't find any gem, but I have all these stories to tell you. So she says, okay, tell me these stories at least. And then they have this conversation, and then he says, okay, now I'm going to cut off my wings, because that was the terms of the thing, that if he couldn't find the gems, he had to cut off his wings. So he takes these scissors and he's going to cut off his wings. When Chandramani stops him and says, stop, and the rest you can read in the book.
Thank you for this wonderful reading, Nitin. I want to ask you, what were the challenges when you started writing this? Because it's not something that you do in your normal life, right? When I say normal, your day job. So what were some of the challenges to when you put this together?
If you look at the stories in these, they are timeless. You could put them in 2023, in 1984, in 1947, 1600. They're sort of, the themes are recurring. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. So, the stories are the relationship between king and subject, between subjects, how do you have a prosperous economy. All of that is evergreen. So what happens is when you read a story, you tend to associate it with a current day political event. And then one of the things as a person who's trying to write, you're trying to decontextualize it. You don't want people to, is this an argument about Indira Gandhi's emergency? Then you start, Shashi Tharoor did that with the Great Indian Novel, right? So people are now trying to see, okay, in this book, who's Indira Gandhi? Who's Narendra Modi? Who is Siddaramaiah? None of those guys actually exist in the book. But when you read a story, it reminds you of an episode. And then you think, oh, is this a criticism about Indira Gandhi's emergency? Or is this criticism about demonetization,
This reminds me of an incident which Girish Karnad narrated about his Tughlaq, the play Tughlaq, that it became controversial in Pakistan during Zia-ul Haq's regime because they thought it's about him. Though it was written much, 20 or 30 years. Yeah.
So, in a way, it is about him, no? In a way, because these stories and these lessons are evergreen, it does become about them, It is, the book, the passage which I read out, I deliberately did that because we are in a situation where very few of us criticize our leaderships. Whichever government, whichever party that you prefer, once you elect this guy or this woman, you just don't criticize them because you think they should be beyond criticism. But criticism of your favorite team, you should criticize your team. Otherwise, it's like driving in a car where you've broken the speedometer, you've broken the fuel gauge, you've broken the rear view mirror, you've broken the side mirrors, and you're still driving, You're going to get into difficulty. You need those mirrors and those feedback mechanisms, which trusted insiders can give.
And I think fables, the format that you have used, the fables do this so well, perfectly. Thank you for that. We have 10 minutes. Yeah, we can open this for floor for questions. But before that, I had promised I will reveal the next part. That I think is important because exactly.
So the ending, I'll try to give you as much of it without spoiling the suspense. So what happens is, this professor who gave it to me, that Afghan person, is a professor called, his name is Professor Asfandyar. And after this book is given to the publisher, I get a message from this man saying that it's time for you to return the manuscript. And it's quite surprising because no one knew that this contract had been signed and this book was ready for publishing. So in his book, he says, I'm very disappointed that it took you so long to translate this. It's like a professor telling a student, you're an A grade student, how are you? Your assignment is late and it's bad. So anyway, so he sends this letter and says, it's time for you to return it. And he gives some clues or some signs of how that manuscript is to be returned. And one day, a person comes to my office, dressed like a New York City banker, and he picks up the manuscript and he goes. So, but I won't tell you the...
Yeah, fiction writers have a lot to learn from Nitin, I must say.